Why don't we get started? We don't have minutes to approve, so I don't think we need a quorum. So why don't we get started? Then we'll turn it over to Mary. So I'll start with you, Pat, for introductions.
Hi, my name is Pat Kimball. I'm a recovery ally and the current chair of the Maine Recovery Council. Welcome.
Katrina,
I'm Katrina Blanish. I'm with the AG's office.
Grayson,
Hi, my name is Grayson. I am also with the AG's office.
Bruce,
Hello, Bruce Nodden, with the Maine Reentry Network, person in long-term recovery and a person who lives with mental health challenges.
thank you. Liz,
Sorry, I was trying to hit the mute button. Liz Blackwell Moore. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Public Health for the Cumberland County Public Health Department.
great. Mary,
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Coyne. I am the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
and I'm Joe Everett, the President and CEO here at the Opportunity Alliance in South Portland, and I chair the Program and Grants Committee of the Council. So Mary, without further ado, I'll turn it right over to you to continue the conversation about grants, the grant application process.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me just pull up a couple documents. Katrina, if I could also have sharing privileges, that would be great. Thank you. Actually, let me start with this. Before we get going, I'd like to offer the suggestion that we move the Program and Grants Committee meeting back to once a month. And much like the Finance Committee is set to a regular schedule, as is our full council meeting, from my workload and my perspective, it would be helpful if we could set an ongoing date for when these meetings are held. I think we found ourselves a couple times, in a position where the every 3 week schedule falls either right before a council meeting or right after, and just to make sure we're using our time as productively as possible. I think it would be helpful if we could schedule this meeting the last Tuesday of every month. And I think that would help set up a good cadence with the full council meeting being the second Thursday of the month. So I don't know if there's any opinions or perspectives on that now, but Joe, I just wanted to call that out for the next couple months at least. And then when we have a new council, of course, we can decide if that feels appropriate.
Yeah, I agree, Mary. I just think it's really hard even to do the minutes, like 3 weeks. It's just we've been so fast paced. So I think going to every 4 weeks or monthly is desirable for sure. So yeah, and we can look at the what that looks like, the dates.
Okay.
You're thinking the
Wonderful.
last Tuesday of the month, so I'll put together something and send to the group just to look at before people, and then we can see if it works for everyone.
Okay, great. For today's discussion, I would like to go over some questions that I have for you all regarding the grant evaluation process. Because of the quick turnaround time between the last council meeting and this one, I don't have a full rubric to share, but some higher level questions that I would like us to go over to discuss. And then after we do this, what I'll do is walk you through what the grant application looks like right now on Smarter Select, which is the platform that we've approved to use. And thank you to the Attorney General's office for getting that up and running so quickly. What you see here is a recommendation for some of the evaluation criteria that we can use. This was pulled from other state resources as well as Maine state grant applications for, again, the different areas that we can evaluate for our grant application. And what we've started to do, and thank you, Grayson, for your help with this, is to pull together which elements of the grant application align with each criteria. And similar to the way we did this for the letter of intent, the final evaluation rubric will also highlight which elements of the grant application we will point evaluators to, so that everybody has a very clear sense of what they're evaluating and how they're doing that. So the first recommendation is for us to look at the use of funds. Pretty self-explanatory, but looking at how applicants provide an overview of their project and its alignment with our approved uses, and then how that serves a target population. this aspect of the evaluation would also look at priority strategies and ensuring that they were identified correctly, at least from the evaluator's perspective, and that the priority strategy aligns with the project goals and narrative as outlined. I'll just walk through these all and then we can have a discussion. The second criteria I'm presenting or recommending is to look at the demonstrated need for these funds, looking at the description of need for the project and any relevant data or evidence-based practices that are included within the narrative. Ensuring that applicants provide a pretty clear and full explanation of how that our funding will specifically benefit the community through the proposed activities within their application. And then as well, looking at how organizations will potentially mitigate barriers to implementation of their project. So looking forward, and that also relates to the sustainability aspect of our grant application. I also recommend we look at the capacity each organization has for implementation. If, as you'll recall, there's an aspect of the grant application that looks at key timeline, activities, milestones, as well as which staff members will be overseeing or managing each aspect of the project. So we're looking here at staff experience, partnership development, and collaboration, and that will also tie into the letter of commitment or partnership that we will be requesting. Another element to the implementation evaluation is ensuring that applicants are taking into consideration other efforts across the state that may be similar to what they're proposing, and how what their project includes will not duplicate current efforts, or if it will duplicate current efforts, how it will supplement those efforts to ensure success. I'm also proposing the council look at the project goals. And this one, again, is pretty self-explanatory, but making sure that the goals included in the project, and that includes in the timeline, the activities, the narrative, and the SMART goals we'll be asking about, that those are all specific, appropriate, and realistic to the project as it's outlined, and that all of the proposed activities directly relate to the goals and outcomes of the project in a logical progression. So making sure evaluators feel like they understand how applicants will use our funding to get from point A to point B, as well as measure success. And then last but not least, also recommending we look at project sustainability and how the proposed activity will be sustained, what information is provided in the application to ensure that, again, the current programming or the new programming will be sustained, enhanced, or expanded after the Maine Recovery Council's grant funding expires. And again, with that, we'll be looking at the budget piece primarily, as well as the outcomes and questions within the narrative that ask specifically about sustainability. From those recommendations, does the committee have any questions, input, or clarification at this point? And again, all fairly high level.
Pat,
Mary, refresh my memory. You have a question here about the capacity of the staff or of an evaluation. Is there a question or a way in that grant that in that application that we would know that?
Within the application, the council at our last meeting recommended that we include staff bios as part of the project activities and timeline. And so that will be included as a separate attachment in the application. So we will have a sense of staff experience. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Liz.
Hi, yeah, thanks. This is great, Mary. It's super helpful to see the criteria. I'm wondering if with it, then will there be like a point structure, like answered all the questions or highly, like will it give us like a range of what points we should give or on a scale, or I'm assuming you've already thought this through, but I was just curious.
Yes, there will be points that we assign to each of these. And I've thought it through to a certain extent, but I'm also hoping, as part of this conversation, the committee can weigh in on which evaluation criteria we would like to see more heavily weighed than other elements. And in my review of how other states are doing this, there is quite a bit of variability in how that scoring is assigned. And so I also welcome any opinions or perspectives, on which elements we want to see have a higher score point assigned to them, and which, may only receive, let's say, 5 to 10 points. Right now I'm operating under the assumption we'll have a 100-point scale. That seems to be pretty standard, and given how complex these applications can be, it seems like a reasonable scale for us to implement. But if again there are suggestions for a different scale, I'm open to that at this point. Does that answer your question, Liz?
Yes, sorry. My my mute button is difficult on my phone and I'm on my phone. Sorry.
No worries.
It does answer my question. And I think, I think we could probably have a robust conversation about this for sure. I guess I would, if you're not that you're necessarily asking me in particular, but I guess if I'm going to put my 2 cents in, use of the funds. I mean, I think everybody kind of qualifies to a certain degree on the use of the funds. So and demonstration of need for the funds, except for the part around, it would be great. I think there was a question there of how did you come up with these? That would be awesome to have a little more points in, but it feels like your organization's capacity, the goals and the outcomes you're going to have, feel quite important and maybe are weighted a little bit more heavily. And that sustainability, considering this might only be 2-year funding, for many of these organizations, it's not going to be long-term funding. So, I mean, the one on sustainability feels like the place that we maybe need to have the most robust conversation on, because, it's like, do we plan on funding some of these for a long period of time? And if we're only doing 2 years, then we may really want to more heavily weight sustainability so that it's about projects that we think have the potential to find other funding sources after this. But I think that's obviously a conversation for all of us to weigh in on. Thank you.
That was helpful, Liz. Thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, I see sustainability as a very a difficult conversation, because folks are going to be kind of asked to predict the future. I think we really need to be careful with that part of it. That's just my opinion. It's hard to predict what's going to be happening in 2 years, and we are going to be asked as scores to kind of predict if these things will be sustainable going forward. So I think that's a really difficult category.
Liz.
Well, although I agree, I don't think I don't know that we're asking necessarily for people to predict. I think we're asking people to think through what are the opportunities that they see now that are out there. So say you're applying for funding to seed a project. It's like explaining why you think a pilot project leads you to have more funding in the future. Or say there are other projects like yours that are already happening that have state funding, and once you're up and going, you think you'll have state funding. Or if we had the funding to build the capacity, we then would be able to apply for MaineCare to be sustainable. I think there's a lot of options for people, and I think we need to assess whether or not we think those are viable, given they're only 2 years. We're only offering 2 years of funding. I don't think we want to, unless we decide we want to fund for longer than 2 years, in which case then we're not creating a funding cliff for something that just gets going. Which I'm fine funding things for longer than 2 years, but then we should make that I think we kind of need to decide that to a certain degree, or weight more heavily on projects that have ideas of how they're going to get funding.
Well, I think there will be sort of, potentially a few different types of applications. I think in this, day and age, we may get proposals where a project is a 2-year period, and we've certainly all done that. And then we will have ones that have, longer term aspirations. And in the LOI process, just from my experience, I knew they couldn't do what they were proposing. So I think, Liz, to your point, that's sort of, and Gordon, I'd love your thoughts about this, but I do think we're entering into a new era with projects. I mean, people are not going to open 24/7 programs. There's no staff. Well, some people will, but I mean, it won't be the biggest. So I think, just delineating kind of the different types. And I mean, then that'll obviously scoring will depend on the written word. If people propose sort of a tight 2-year program that's going to sunset, that's great. If someone proposes a long-term program with a sustainability plan, that's great. But I think and hope we'll get kind of both of those options. Pat.
So, I look at some of these questions and I think, should we weigh them more than others? And you hate to think that you're just that a stable plan to keep going, it is important. But I'm looking at this, and for me, part of the question isn't about stability, but can you implement it? Can you get it started even within the 2 years that you had it? You have the money, and what does that timeline look for you? Are you going to spend 2 years just getting the project started? And if you take 2 years to get it started, then you have no idea about the sustainability of it. I guess you'd have a plan, but you can't really predict. But for me, implementing the project and what's the plan to get it going is important also. So that was just my thoughts that came to my head. Thinking out loud.
Thanks, Pat. Gordon.
Yeah, let me introduce myself, Joe, for people that are on the call. That I came in late. I apologize for that. I'm Gordon Smith, the State's Director of Opioid Response in Governor Mills' office. I think on this question of sustainability, I think it really does depend upon the project. I don't want to discriminate against projects that are just for 2 years. There may be some really important things they can do in 2 years, and it's never intended that it will continue beyond that point. Now, some types of projects, if you're setting up a treatment facility, recovery residents, recovery centers, it's absolutely true that a lot of the things that we invest in, we hope that we can find sustainable revenue sources that they will continue indefinitely, because we wouldn't start them if we didn't think that they were doing good things. So, but I do think it really depends upon the project. And I wouldn't like to see a project get devalued simply because it's intended to start and be completed in 2 years.
No, me neither. And I hope I didn't suggest that. No, I think I agree. Liz.
Yeah, I'm definitely not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that answer matters. Like that the answer to the question matters, and not that I have a particular answer that I think is that should have more higher points. I'm saying, did they answer it with an answer that's suitable to our understanding of where they're going? Are they saying it's a 2-year project, and did they say how it's going to be a 2-year project? Great. Did they explain how they think they're going to have sustainable funding for the future? Great. Like I'm saying, that it should have a lot more points perhaps than say the part around which pillar or the needs, because everybody has told us, we know there are so many needs. I think, like you said, Pat, it's like, are they going to implement it? How are they going to implement it? And how are they going to either keep it going or end it? Like those to me, and what is the project are the three like ones that I would say should have more points than the first two.
Any other questions or comments? Pat?
So here's my silly question. In the software that we have that's going to calculate all of this, is there a way to put that in the formula if a question is weighted more than another? So that there's a way to do that, right?
Yes, as far,
So if something is worth 10 points, 20 points. Yeah, okay, yeah. I answered my own question. Sure, that's in there. Silly me. Okay, thank you.
sorry, I'm sneezing as I was trying to answer that. From the tutorial that I went through, and again, I'm still in the midst of trying to figure it out, but yes, we can assign those. And if for some reason it's harder for us to do so, we can ensure that it's outlined in the evaluation and when that is assigned to external reviewers for us. So yes, that we can incorporate how it's weighted.
Courtney?
Hi, Joe. Hi, everybody. I apologize for my tardiness. I was in class. Is there any way somebody could brief me on the last 20 minutes of conversation real quick? Just like super high level. Are we discussing the grant?
So Courtney, this is Pat. So what this that Mary has before us is sort of an outline of a possible scoring rubric for the evaluation of the scoring of the grants. And she's just going over this list that's in front of you about the areas that we will be asked to score on when we read the grants. I
Okay,
think
great.
that's-
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Courtney, what I'm looking at right now for the committee's feedback is some pretty high level questions about what we want to consider in the grant evaluation process. And then what we're starting to get into is how we're going to weigh each of those different criteria as well, and what we want to see assigned higher points when we go through the evaluation process.
Okay, great. The only thing I'd like to add, I came in on the conversation around sustainability. I completely understand that sustainability is super important, and also nonprofits are inherently unsustainable. And so I've always like really struggled with this sustainability conversation, because people can say like, if it's a main care program, of course it's going to be more sustainable than a certain service program that has no way to make money off of it. And I just struggle with particularly smaller organizations that are just they're just unsustainable. Honestly, you're just always looking for more money, and that's the answer that we're going to get from a lot of these smaller orgs. So just wanted to throw that on the table.
If I can just jump in for a second, Courtney, I think that brings up a really good point about how the committee may like to see the evaluation criteria and the scoring weight differ depending on the tier and the amount of funding in which an applicant is applying. My recommendation is that we don't change the criteria based on application tier, but if the committee thinks it's appropriate, there is the option for us to, weigh sustainability more heavily for some of the higher funding requests, and for the tier 3 and 4, for instance, and for the smaller funding requests, weigh it not as heavily. And not that that's the equivalent of small versus large projects, but if we do want to differentiate a little bit, I just wanted to put that out there as something the committee can consider.
The only other thing I'll add is what I'm particularly interested in is the outcomes that the money's going to provide. What are they going to do with it, and how many people are they going to impact, or how many X they're going to, whatever it is, whatever their outcomes are. That's what I'm interested in, having the deepest impact with the amount of money that we have.
Courtney, do you see that as a separate and additional evaluation criteria to this current list?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be under the SMART goals, right? Under the.
Yep.
I think it's a separate evaluation that.
Yeah, I would say it's like under 4, right, Courtney? Like under SMART goals, it's like project impact instead of it being its own. But perhaps that number 4 gets a lot more
The
it gets a lot more points.
Sustainability question for sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I believe what I'm hearing the committee say is the use of funds and the demonstrated need for funds. Those are evaluation criteria we do want to see included in the rubric, but we don't want to see those have as many points assigned to them, given we have a pretty good understanding of why this money is needed and how it will be used. But that 3 through 5, the capacity an organization has for implementation, the goals and impact of a project, and then as well as its sustainability, we want to see more points assigned to those 3 evaluation criteria. Is that correct?
I actually think 1 and 2, I think that's the project narrative for me. I think if people are not clear on what they're doing, so I wouldn't want them way under the other, 1 and 2. I think use of funds and demonstrated need from the LOIs, I think that they're very important to me. I mean, they all are, all the ones, Mary, you've done a good job. They're all very important. And you can, I'm fine with you weighing them, based on the conversation, but I wouldn't want to see them way less.
Okay, that's helpful.
And I'm just
Thank you.
one voice, but
No, I agree. I mean, you have to demonstrate a need. You have to say clearly what the project is, and you have to demonstrate a need. Those are important questions. Yeah, it's really hard to look at them and really weigh them.
yeah.
It isn't what the project is, project 4. Isn't that number 4?
Specific goals, specific.
But I just thought the use of the funds was like is more about how it's related to the approved uses. But maybe I'm like, don't remember the actual grant application well enough. But that's why I'm wondering, Mary, where is it that is like, what's the project? And how are you going to complete, how are you going to complete it? Is that all in number 4, or is it spread out throughout the whole thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is a little bit spread out, but it's mostly focused on number 4. The use of the funds, I see this number 1 as part of that, Liz, as part of the narrative, but also slightly separate. And I think that we could isolate use of the funds and have it, be assigned 5 or 10 points. After review of the LOIs, I do think there is a need for us to assign at least a few points to projects that clearly articulate how they align with an approved use and a priority strategy. And part of that is, again, on the priority strategy side, part of this application and part of what the council has done is to identify those strategies. And we mentioned in the LOI, and also we'll mention in this grant application, that applications that align with those priority strategies will be favored, at least to some extent, in the scoring process. And so that's also part of why this use of funds was its own category. But I think it's accurate to say the use of the funds, more detail and description is provided within that number 4 project goals and impact section. And this is really looking at, does it check our boxes and does it appropriately match a pillar in a strategy? Does that make sense?
So here's my question. The questions in the actual grant application don't necessarily directly correlate to these questions up here. Like, if I look at use of funds, number one, use of funds, question funds and grant application aren't there. So when you look at these questions, you have had to read the full grant and then scored them, because you could find responses or things within these questions within the grant. Am I correct with that? Or am I being confusing? I've confused myself.
No, no, that makes sense. And I apologize for not having this be more straightforward. Similar to the LOI, to accurately score the grants, yes, you will have to read them in their entirety. And some of these criteria will have specific questions that an evaluator can point to say, oh, does this matches, you know, more or less to what I'm looking at to evaluate, and incorporating what I know from looking at the full application. You know, what do I think is the most appropriate score for this category? So it's a both and.
Thank you.
Courtney.
Barry, is the use of funds a like a checkbox thing, or is it a narrative that people have to write?
The approved use, in the grant application, there is there's an approved use assessment. So there is a table that applicants will be asked to fill out that in one column highlights the approved use. And then in the next column looks at how the program and project aligns with the approved use, examples of the activity, and then any supporting research or additional information. So unlike the LOI, which we just ask applicants to check a box of which approved use aligned, in the grant application, we are asking for applicants to go, you know, the next step and explain how their program aligns specifically with each approved use they select. And part of that was
So
from, oh, go ahead.
sorry, Mary. I think I'm about to say what you were about to say. So I see the intention of number one as ensuring that this money is used on approved uses outlined in the MOU, and people having to articulate exactly what the project, how it aligns with the approved uses, and then also articulate how it aligns with our priority strategies, correct?
Mostly the priority strategy right now is not incorporated into the approved use assessment. It can be, and I think implicitly, yes, it is. But the way the approved use assessment is structured now is looking specifically at, you know, the number of the approved use. So, you know, attaching it to the number in Exhibit E, and then providing more information about the specific activities that your project will undertake that align with that approved use. And as part of that, I do believe that the applicant's strategy will be highlighted. And part of this is, one, to make sure that applicants are really thinking about how their project aligns with Exhibit E and our funding criteria. And in some of our letter of intents, you know, applicants, they checked many approved uses because they could apply. And what this is also trying to do is ask applicants to really focus on which approved uses most apply, so that we're not, you know, looking at 15 to 20 different approved uses, but instead having applicants highlight those that, you know, most target and align with their project.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'll say it frankly, there was a lot of LOIs that I read that I was like, that's not that. Like, you guys are stretching real far right now. To be able, and the way that it was based, it was a yes, no question. So they got the point. But I think I like the intention behind this section. What I will say is I think that this council worked really hard to get to those priorities in a unanimous consent. And I think that that needs to be reflected in this document as well as in our scoring process. We've said, I think time and time again, that our priorities will rise to the top, and that has to come through in the scoring, or that's not guaranteed to happen if it's not coming through in the scoring. And we worked, I mean, I'll just reiterate one time, we worked really hard to figure out what those priorities were. And I think that we have to like shape the outcome of all of this based on the work that we did on those priorities.
So Courtney, that's addressed in question 2. It says select the pillar that most accurately reflects. And then it also goes on to saying what strategy does it meet? Please select the strategy that best aligns with your project. If your project does not align, please identify what strategies you are using in 50 to 75 words. So there is a place in the grant application that specifies which of the strategies you're applying for.
Perfect. Is there points attached to that section?
We haven't talked about specific points for each section,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
what we're looking at right now, use of funds, Part B, would be a separate, I think from what I'm hearing from you, and it's a great call out, is that the use of the funds is one aspect, but we also need to have a separate set of points specifically attached to those strategies, because this council did spend a few months really identifying those, and we need to make sure that those are a separate, again, set of criteria and points. And this may be premature to ask folks to weigh in on, but do you have a sense of how many points feel appropriate to assign to those priority strategies? If we're operating under the assumption that the total grant could receive up to 100 points. My recommendation would be in the 5 to 10 point range, but if the council feels it's appropriate to go higher or lower, I also want to hear those opinions.
I will admit that it's hard for me to say based on not knowing what the other things are getting. So I'm sorry to say, I don't know that I personally would offer. It's like looking at all of them and adjusting them based on what the other ones get.
Okay.
I agree. I was like, I feel like I need a spreadsheet
Yeah.
of like what all the things are that are getting points, and then what to assign each of those things, how many points.
Okay. That makes sense. So what I'll plan to do for our full council meeting is have a recommendation for those scores, but we'll finalize the exact scoring allocation at our next meeting. Any other thoughts or comments on the conversation so far before I move on to a couple other questions? Specifically, is there any more comments on the project sustainability component of the evaluation? I don't know if we really came to a sort of a conclusion on that aspect. Okay, move on to the questions. I have a couple questions here that I already think are answered a little bit. I'm gonna move on to number 3. How does the committee recommend evaluating community partnerships in the evaluation process? And part of that is a logistical question of what the best way might be for us to incorporate that into the actual evaluation rubric. It's also a question about if we want to prioritize, community partnerships within the evaluation, similar to the priority strategies, if that's something that we want to encourage. We can assign points differently. So I just want to open the floor to a conversation around that.
Pat.
So, Mary, that question's a little hard to answer because in the grant, it's not, we didn't tell people they have to collaborate, but we're encouraging people, we want them to collaborate. And so, the question is, if a project doesn't collaborate, do they get less points than a project that does? Is that what we want to do? So that's sort of my question as to how you score that and how it relates to the application, because that's sort of a question. I mean, if I apply for something and it doesn't require collaboration, do I automatically get less points than if I collaborate? And by collaboration, I mean a direct link with a partnership, not just I talked to somebody next door.
Great.
Gordon's got his
Thank you.
hand up.
Gordon?
Well, just for the purposes of discussion, I think this does warrant, more points. Collaboration, it's so essential. And the way to maximize these funds throughout what we're doing is to make sure that the work is not siloed, but that people are working together and collaborating. I agree, Pat, that we might have to be a little more detailed on what we mean by collaboration. But I do think it's such an essential part of this work that I'd be fine awarding additional points to an organization that demonstrated that how they were putting their project together was very collaborative.
Thank you, Gordon. I also, and Liz, I see your hand. I do want to call out just one aspect of the grant application. In one of the questions that we ask in the project impact and goal section, excuse me, it does, in essence, it gets to what opportunities for input and involvement the project focuses on, and if there is that sort of inclusive and collaborative element to the project's focus. So while it is about partnerships, I also think this question gets to how those voices are included in the decision making and in the decision making process. Liz?
Yeah, and I wonder if I'm all for giving more points to collaborative or just like collaborations and people ensuring that they've heard that they've taken in consideration and have been working with community members or other members who will be impacted. And I also think there is a way, like you said, if the smaller, collaboration costs money, right? So if there are the smaller grants, perhaps this is less, it's less of a change in points. And with the larger grants, that those are ones in which collaboration more, you can have more points in those, in the higher tiers. Could be one way to do it.
I don't really know. Well, I know what the definition of collaboration is, but I don't know what that means in the context of this grant and or these projects. Can somebody help tease that out for me?
I can weigh in, and again, this is just from my perspective, but I think the collaboration piece, within our grant specifically is one around any external partners in which you're collaborating with who are also doing the work and involved in the community, bringing in those voices. And then it's also about, I think in some way, Courtney, to what we discussed at the last council meeting about involving people with lived or living experience, you know, in the decision-making process, and how you're fostering that sort of inclusive and collaborative environment within the decision-making of your project and the early stages of it in some ways, and then also with your outcomes and your goals, how you're making sure to foster that collaboration throughout the life cycle of a project.
Okay, so I think I have an example, and then help me understand if this is what you mean. And this is an example that is not a pending project. So like bringing together all the recovery community centers to work on LD 1714, while not our like formal, had no like MOUs or like official documents. We were all collaborating together to get something done. Is that collaboration, or is it more of a formal, we are working with the Department of Corrections to do X thing, and we have a MOU saying that we'll do that? Or are both of those things collaboration?
I think both are.
Yeah, if I were scoring, I would say both of those are, right? Like
Mhm.
one is informal, one's formal, or the informal one helped create what the project is. And that's, and I mean, not all projects require like deep, like we're going to pay these other people to do this. I mean, it kind of depends on the project, but I would think they would both be collaborations.
Okay, great. I just wanted to tease that out with you all. So then I'm good with that. That's fine.
Pat,
So I have to admit, I've only read through this application 2 or 3 times. So I'm asking Mary, who's at it, if I was an applicant, is there a question that comes out of this that asks me directly, how am I collaborating? If we're specifically going to have points to it, if I was doing this application, do you feel there's a question asked directly in regards to community collaboration?
Right now yes, there is. In the project narrative section 4B, there's the project impact and goals. And there's 3 bullet points, and the last of those bullet points asks what opportunities for input and involvement from the communities your project focuses on, and how do you plan to make it inclusive and collaborative? And I've been workshopping that language a little bit because it's confusing, but the essence of it is, yes, what opportunities do you have for that input and involvement from the community, and how do you plan to make your project inclusive and collaborative? So there's that direct tie.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up, and maybe this hasn't been determined yet, so maybe I'm just raising something, but are the applicants going to have access to the matrix and the scoring document?
I believe because it will be discussed at the next council meeting and need to be voted on, then yes, it will be a public document.
Okay, I like that. I've experienced different things with different grants. Some grants that like keep it private, and some grants that give it to you. And I think it helps as you think about your project and implementation of the project to be able to have it.
Yeah, and I will say it won't be, because the goal is to have the application published by the end of this week, if not early next week. The evaluation rubric will not be finalized at the same times, but there will be time between when the applications are due and when that evaluation is finalized at our next full council meeting, for applicants to make adjustments if they feel it's appropriate. Any additional comments, questions, or thought about the community partnership piece? Hearing nothing, I'll move on to another question that I have for you all, which is about how how you wish to incorporate innovation into the evaluation process, if you want to incorporate it at all. I know throughout this grant application cycle and all the discussions that we've had, innovation has been something that we've discussed, but hasn't necessarily been prioritized within our application structure. So if there is a way that the committee would like to recommend, we do encourage that innovation piece within our scoring. I would love to hear your thoughts on how you would like to see that done. And I know this is something that Dr. D has discussed a couple of times, so I wish she was here to weigh in, but if anyone else has anything they'd like to comment, let me know.
Do you remember what Dr. Tia said about this, Mary?
I remember Dr. D mentioning wanting to have, and don't quote me on this, but I believe we discussed having innovation as either a separate pillar or part of our strategies at some point. And other states have specifically published innovation RFPs and grants, and highlighted innovation, not all, but some states have highlighted innovation in their evaluation rubric. So I want to present that option, and again, talk about the best way to possibly do that, if the committee would like to.
I mean, I think at this point we're like down the road too far to have another pillar, and there's not enough money to keep sending out new grant applications. So if we want to prioritize innovation, I feel like it would have to be in this round or in a way future conversation that's not happening right now.
Pat?
So reading through this application, we're not saying that somebody who didn't have an innovative project or someone who had a project that was promising practice but maybe not evidence-based, we're allowing them to apply. It's not heavily weighted on the fact that it has to be evidence-based, which to me would say that if I had an innovative idea that I thought fell under recovery or one of the pillars, why I couldn't apply and why it wouldn't score well if it was written well and something that met a gap. Because if you're talking about, who you're serving and why you're serving them and where, but there's nothing in here that discriminates somebody from applying with an innovative project. Am I correct or am I missing something?
I'll weigh in here. No, I don't think you're missing anything. And at this point in the process, right, we're not reinventing the wheel and we're not adding new pillars or priority strategies. Really what this is getting at is if we want to emphasize innovation in our scoring, similar to the way we're prioritizing projects that align with our identified priority strategies, not to the same extent, but because we haven't specifically, mentioned innovation as a core component of this application. So it may not be something we even want to include as a separate call out in the evaluation. And that's completely fine. I just wanted to, again, open the conversation because if it is something that we want to highlight, I would love to hear your thoughts. And I also think this ties into, potentially some new projects that we're seeing and have been invited to apply. If they have new and innovative ideas for how to approach a need that we know exists and have seen consistently addressed in other ways, I think the rubric could potentially, we could build in those opportunities to score applicants who are approaching things in a new and different way. to score them a little bit higher. Does that make sense?
Oh, I understand now. I like that idea. That's a good idea, Mary. You're saying add it to the rubric, right?
Yes, yep. And sorry, I should have provided this context. This is all about the grant evaluation rubric, not about the grant application. I'm looking for feedback from you all so I can create the evaluation rubric for us to finalize at the next meeting. And that innovation piece is something we can include and that I've seen included in other states' rubrics. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up if we want to have that emphasis.
I like that idea, and it averts a crisis of trying to do a new grant or a new thing or a new pillar. I like that idea. It like integrates it without creating a lot more work.
Yeah. At this point, we will not be creating another grant unless it's prevention. And I feel very strong. Liz?
Well, I was just gonna say, I like the idea too. I just wonder if, how will we know if something's innovative or not? Like, how will the reviewers know that? I do think like doing some level of like identifying what is innovative. Because as a reviewer, I might not know what all the innovative things are. What are things that have already been done? I just think I love the idea. I'm just getting down to the technicality of how to do that. Will it be a question? Like, is this innovative? Do you think this is an innovative, have you seen this done before that's in there that we can assess? Or is it like our own assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciating you moving into this for the nuances of this. In reading the draft application, no, right now there's no specific call out for how a project is innovative or even a promising practice. We do have a question about why the project is important, how it addresses specific community needs, and how that determination was made. I think there's an opportunity, if the committee would like, for us to add a sentence onto one of the existing questions about, if your project is innovative, please, describe how it provides a different approach to the defined need. We can most certainly do that, but there is not a specific call out for innovation right now within the application.
I wouldn't be opposed to adding it in. I know that would be like additional work to add it in, but I do feel like there are ways in which people might, like, I think if there are proposals in which people are doing a cultural adaptation of something where like a group has been totally underrepresented in this, where we aren't really doing work for that group of people. And then in that space, a proposal writer could say, hey, this is why we think it's innovative, because we've done this cultural adaptation for this group of people. Or, we think it's innovative because we, have only seen these responses to it, like giving the proposal writer the opportunity to share with us if they think it's innovative or not. And maybe doing a little definition of innovation. I know we already approved so that's like a whole other thing that maybe you don't want to do right now. But I don't think we should leave it to the reviewers to decide whether it's innovative or not. Somebody can convince me otherwise, but I just don't know how the reviewers would do that you would be basing it on everybody's knowledge as opposed to what the proposal writers write.
Bruce.
Yeah, I totally agree with Liz. I think the applicant needs to make the argument for, how this is an innovative approach and why it's an innovative approach, and identify that this is not something that's being done at least widely. in the state of Maine.
Yeah, so just to nail it down, so since the application has Mary has sort of the trains left that station, what are you comfortable doing kind of with in terms of the application and getting it launched?
Thank you for that question. I do believe, again, looking at that 4B project impact and goals, I think there is room in the way the questions are currently written for us to add a mention about innovation. I think if we do include it, it will be a small part of the narrative that we request. But with that said, you know, I do think it will be, I don't want to say easy, but I think we can incorporate pretty nicely that innovation component into the current application. And that if we did add innovation into the evaluation criteria, that we could again have sort of a smaller number of points assigned to that to emphasize that we are looking, you know, for innovative projects, especially when it comes to some of the newer projects we may intend to fund. So I think it's reasonable for us to include innovation in the grant. And I can also run it by Dr. T of, you know, how the language looks from her perspective as well.
That sounds good.
Great. While we're on the topic, for new projects, are there any specific, is there any specific criteria that council would like to see, you know, kind of called out for those newer projects? Do we want to look at the scoring differently, or I guess any considerations that, you know, we want to incorporate beyond something that's innovative? It'd be helpful to hear any thoughts on that.
Okay, Pat and Courtney, I'm sorry, go ahead,
So-
Pat, on my screen, you're first, so not sure who had their hands up first.
Yeah, so I do have a question under new projects. So in the application, you ask for salaries and job description and bios. But for a brand new project, can you ask if it's a brand new project that they put in job descriptions? Because if I'm a brand new project and I haven't hired any staff yet, I don't have any bios to give you.
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you.
That's a great call. Thank you, Pat.
Mary, I was just wondering if you had examples of what you might mean by that.
I don't have specific examples. I think as we've been talking about really a lot of this criterion, and we kind of touched on it when we started the discussion about implementation and sustainability. You know, if there are just different ways we want to look at how established organizations versus new organizations are approaching the use of this funding, I think that would be appropriate. And in all honesty, I don't know the best way to go about that, which is why I brought it to the committee to weigh in on.
Can
So-
I ask a question? Are you talking about new projects or new organizations?
I'm talking about both, because we do have some LOIs where it's a newer organization and a new project. We have more new projects versus organizations, but we do have some 501c3s, for instance, that are in the process of receiving that certification, and are newer.
And the question is, do we want to give them more or less points? Is that what you're asking?
In essence, I'm asking if we want to evaluate any components of their application differently.
I mean, in my mind, it's like this question of like, can you do the work? What's your capacity to do the work? And I don't know that giving a new organization like higher points for being new, like I want to know that they can do the work in 2 years. So if they can show to me as a new organization that they have totally the capability to do it, then they'll write something really good in that section. I wouldn't want to give them more points personally.
I agree with Liz. I don't think old or new should get any more or less. I think I've had experiences where long-term organizations are better at some things than small new organizations, and I've had experiences where new organizations are like ready to go and fired up and you get more done with less than a multi-million-dollar organization. I think it's really context dependent based on who's doing the work, what they're doing, and what kind of capacity they have.
Great. That's helpful input. And it sounds like we've addressed those questions already in the evaluation criteria and also within the grant application. Great. Those were the questions that I have for you all right now. I'm sure others will come up, but are there any questions or points of discussion that the committee would like to raise about the evaluation process right now?
I just want to say thank you for your thoughtfulness on all of this. This is a real big challenge, and I appreciate how thoughtful you are and bringing it to our attention and us talking through it. So I know it's arduous, but I really appreciate it because I think it'll get us closer to the outcome we're all looking for. So thanks, Mary.
I also just wanted to tell you all that my city's like waiting for us to finish this application so that they can just use our application to do their grant application. So no pressure on us. We're just like the entire state of Maine's waiting for us.
Great. Thank you for that call out, Courtney.
No pressure at all.
No, none. Wonderful. Well, it has been a long process, but one that, this committee, the council, and myself have given significant thought to. So I'm glad to hear that, even though these conversations sometimes are not the most spirited or entertaining, we are getting to the heart of the matter. And I do think our evaluation criteria will match the outcomes that we are intending for this. Anything else about evaluation? I believe we have a finance committee meeting at the end of the month, but otherwise this will be the last time the program and grants has time to weigh in on what the evaluation criteria looks like. So please don't hold back if there's anything you'd like to add. Great. All right, with that being said, the last thing that I have on my agenda, and then I'll turn it over to Joe if there's other business. I would like to walk you all through what the grant application looks like right now on the grant platform. What I will also do is send this test link out to all of you tomorrow and ask if you can take, the 5 to 10 minutes to just walk through it. That would be super helpful, similar to what we did with the LOI. Really what I'm looking for is if there's any suggestions you all have for the flow of the application, if there's any parts of it where you can't move on and you want to, or you don't believe something should be required, those are all call outs, or really anything else that you as new applicants who have never seen this before would like to see change to ease your application process. That would be great. So let me walk you through what we've got so far. And this, I apologize, I think this view will be a little bit different than what you all see because I'm the administrator, so yours will look different, and that's how it should be. All right. I can't see this now. Great. So when applicants go into this portal, they will be asked to sign up with, an email and a password. There is a 2-factor authentication. So every time folks log in, they'll be asked to have an email sent or a text sent. When you sign up and you start the Maine Recovery Council grant application, you will receive an email notification, and it will be signed from the Maine Recovery Council that you've begun your application. It will give the project due date of October 25th, and also a link to any support help they need. The way that it, is set up is that applicants can preview the entire application. This is something that after the LOI thought would be helpful for folks, so they could capture exactly what questions are asked and what components need to be completed. There is also the feature where applicants can start and then save where they are, which I think will be really helpful, and also a more easeful process for both the applicants and myself during this process, something we did not have during the LOI. So we have the organization overview questions. These are the same that were asked in the letter of intent. The type of organization. If an applicant selects other, a box will show up for them to fill that in. We also have a project overview section. Again, this is all very standard, very similar to the LOI. Project or program name, and then a pillar. Applicants will then be asked to select their strategy. And this is the same. The way that this works is we'll have all the pillars set up in this view. But as you see in the instructions, applicants will only be asked to select one of these pillars and strategies. If there's a new strategy, or a strategy that is not one of the council's identified strategies, applicants have 50 to 75 words to explain what that is. They will then be asked to upload an approved use assessment. And I'm still working through if the approved use assessment will be something that we post to the website or have a Dropbox link. I'll collaborate with our IT staff to figure out what will be the most appropriate for that. But then applicants will be asked to upload a completed copy of that table. And that table was provided to you all in the draft application. We'll then move into the project summary, looking again at 4A, 4B, and then I'll change the formatting of this. 4C, this is the SMART goals. Something I want to ask the committee. So right now, the version I have of the application is you can complete the SMART goals like this, where it's a text box. I've also created a table for which applicants can then complete the SMART goals in a more organized way, really providing sort of that instruction and guidance for applicants who may not have familiarity with what SMART goals are. Does the committee have any preference as to how the SMART goals are presented? Again, either as a text box within the application or an additional attachment table. And if there's no preference, then I will make the executive decision, but I wanted to call that out.
I wonder if there's actually a way in which you could, I don't mind it like this with a box, but I do wonder if there's a way to provide people with like a link to how to write SMART goals. There's a lot of resources out there on how to write them. And I just think linking to that could be helpful so that people, you're giving them a resource.
Great. I also believe I can include a table within my questions. And if that's the case, I will try to do that as well. But I think the link to SMART goals is a great call. Thank you, Liz.
When we're talking about SMART goals, do we mean something along the lines of like specific, measurable, time bound? So like we will serve X amount of participants by X date, Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
And we're asking applicants to include at least 3 of those goals.
What is it? Specific, measurable,
Achievable.
achievable, realistic,
Re-
and time bound?
I have
Relevant
relevant. Okay.
and time bound.
Time bound. Okay. Yeah, if that took me a minute, then we should probably put a link
Okay. I will add
because
that.
it's been drilled
Fair
into
enough.
my brain over the years.
Well, in the application, you might not be able to see it, Courtney, but it says what SMART goals are, like it says specific. The objective is clear and states, but I just wonder if just a little, which is great. I just think a link to how to write them. Because
'cause
then on the link, there'll be like an example. It'll be like, like you just did, it'll give an example that I think is helpful for folks.
And that'll be very helpful for first-time grant writers versus very experienced grant writers. So I think it's a good addition.
Great. I will add that. And again, if I can add a table within that question of that gives those examples explicitly, I will do that too. A function I'm pretty sure I have, but to be determined. Oh, that was an additional one. This SMART goals is labeled incorrectly. This is for the activities and timeline. If you all recall, in the grant application, we have similar to the format of the SMART goals, we have the activities that are planned to be performed, start and end date, any resources required, evaluation results to be measured, and then who will oversee each of those activities. And so that will be a table that they can download, and then it will provide examples, and then we'll ask them to complete it and upload it here. And then we'll also add the upload for project staff with their bios. And then as Pat has mentioned, if it's a new project, instead of staff bios, to include descriptions of the new jobs. That will be part of this. For implementation sustainability, this will be a separate question. And here are the sort of sub-questions that we'll ask each applicant to address. I've included the tiers for the application. The way that this is structured, I can't show, or I can't specify the word count by application, but when they do complete this text box, it will show the word count. So they will be aware of how much they've written, and we'll also have that information. Then, as we know with the budget narrative, we have a table that we've discussed that reflects each budget category. It gives a description, and then also allows a section under each category for a narrative. So folks will have access to that document. They'll be asked to download, complete it, and then re-upload it here. Letter of commitment, as we discussed, with collaborating partners. And there will also be, I think as requested at the last council meeting, an example of what this can look like. So I'll be sure that's available for folks so they have a sense of what information we're looking for and what the more or less standard format of that could be. And then the last question that's asked is a grant agreement that applicants acknowledge the Maine Recovery Council has ultimate, excuse my spelling, discretion over the decisions and the awards, and that all the information they provided is true and accurate.
And
When
Mary, did you have to check both of those boxes, just like logistical question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then at the top, there was the address wasn't required. I don't know if you want it to be required or if that was intentional.
It was intentional, partly from my own experience of being an independent contractor and not having an address that I want to provide. We can make that required if the council wishes. But if we have a phone number and email, I have the contact information I'll need. I think that is something that if the council wants to see where the primary addresses of the organization, if they're out of state, that is something that, you know, that could be a useful field for.
You could make it required and then in like parentheses, NA, if no physical location.
Okay. Will do.
Third logistical question. If a project, I think the answer is they have to pick one, but if a project meets multiple of our priorities, do they just have to pick one, or is there a way for them to pick 2, 3, however many, and explain that, or we just want them to pick one?
From my understanding, we want them to just pick one. And again, part of that is to really have applicants focus their approved use and their narrative on how it aligns with that specific strategy. I also think, again, there is a lot of overlap with our strategies, and in some justifications, even our pillars. I think we just get into pretty tricky territory with scoring and evaluation if we allow more than one to be chosen. And again, there's ample room for applicants to justify why they've chosen the strategy and pillar that they have.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will just say for the record that the question I received most during the LOI was like, which pillar do I pick? And I'd be like, I don't know, you have to like figure that out. And I bet that was your experience too, Mary.
It was, and the good news is for applicants who will be receiving the grant, they've already had to select a strategy and a pillar. And because we are requesting that they complete the grant application in line with their letter of intent, they will be asked to include the same pillar and strategy.
Okay, is that somewhere on the application? I apologize, I'm driving, so I can't see it.
No, it's okay. That is, it's in the overview, but I will have it explicitly stated in the application. That's a great call out. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, within the community grant application overview and the eligibility, I do outline that you have to submit this grant for the same project that was outlined in your LOI. So I will make sure that's all included here in case folks don't have that.
Yeah, I mean, people are easily distracted.
Yeah. Great, that's very helpful feedback. Anything else from the committee at this point? Great.
Looks really good, Mary. The tool seems very slick.
Yes, it is much easier than Qualtrics, I will tell you that. I'm thankful that the council voted to approve that. I think it'll make the application process far easier and more straightforward for applicants, as well as for our evaluators, myself.
That's great.
So with that said, again, I'll send a test link to all of you tomorrow. If you could just complete it and, just include test information, that would be helpful. And then after doing so, if there's any feedback that you have, if you could just send me an email directly, I'll make any changes that need to be made, and then have that ready for publication again, hopefully by Friday, but if not, first thing on Monday.
And when are they due again, Mary, the applications?
They're due October 25th. Right now they're due October 25th at 5 p.m. I'm also open to having that be until the end of the day, not having that open till midnight. I will say with the LOI, we received quite a few applications within 5 hours of our deadline. So, well, I guess
I'm team midnight as somebody who literally like does things at midnight.
Oh, every grant writer does.
Yeah,
Well,
and at
many of
4
us.
a.m. If it's okay with you, Mary, if there's no like work
No.
problem, no.
I don't believe so. What I'll do is just say that questions will not be answered after 5 p.m. Because I won't put myself in that position, but as someone who is a night owl, I think it is nice to give people that extra time if they need it. So I will change that to 11:59 p.m. on October 25th. Great. Joe, I'll turn it over to you if you have any other business or.
So my
discussions.
last sort of piece of conversation, Pat, and I don't know that we have answers for this procedurally. So we talked, Gordon, before you got on about kind of going back to the every 4 weeks or months, and I'm going to look at like possible dates. But when should we at some point pause on scheduling meetings because of the change in the council? I know the main recovery council is scheduled, I think, maybe throughout the end of the year or ongoing, but anything procedurally, not that we have the answers, but that's my first question for the group. And Pat, if you have any wisdom.
So I have Brendan looking into it to ask it specifically what the procedure is, whether we request that because we're appointed, how that works, and he's looking into that. And then the governance committee, I have to get that moving, will look into how that looks for all of us. Again, I know that there are some members that have already voiced that they won't be part of it, so we will be bringing on new people. But you also have election of officers that come up. Oh, that's January, I think. Get how that works, because they have to be nominated, I think, in November for the January meeting.
They have to be nominated 30 days ahead of time, and it's in the
Yeah.
January meeting. So whatever 30 days ahead of the
Yeah.
second Thursday of January is.
Yeah, so again, that will have to be put on hold until new people come on board. But I really don't have, I'm waiting for Brendan to ask the next steps as to how we do this, because again, they're appointed. And I know that, I mean, there are people that have already come forward and said that time consumed wise, they can't be part. So I know we'll have at least 2 new members, if not 3. So I suggest that we still keep going until I get an answer from Brendan. And when I do, I certainly will let all the members of the council know the process into which we go to move forward. I mean, you know, you get a little nervous because this committee has worked really, really hard, the 15 of us, to get to this point. But I do believe that a majority, which is great, of the people will be coming back, I think, which is good.
That's great. So I guess for this group, what I would recommend is that we will schedule through December, because the change, so to speak, will not happen until January. So we're going to just keep full force business as usual till December.
No, the change happens in December.
December, sorry. The change happens in December?
Yes, I'm counting my days. I love you all, but November 21st.
Yeah, November is the last meeting.
Okay, so then we only should schedule through till November. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say you can schedule in December. You can always take it off. But I don't want this committee or any other part of the council to be slowed up for a day because of these reappointments. We've got too much to do. It's already been, we were under great pressure already. I was disappointed in some of the answers to my questions at the meeting in terms of when some of the contracts would be expected, frankly. And you know what I mean, I think. And so, no, we've got, and I will brief you in a moment here. When you tell me you've done everything else, Joe, I'll brief you in just it won't take long on the Androscoggin grant that we've talked about before, to just bring you up to date on where we are with that $1.5 million. So I just would encourage you to schedule these meetings through the end of the year.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna,
And because we have to do the 14-day notice,
yeah.
it's just easier that if we just schedule them out until December.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw some dates out to y'all this week because of the holiday season coming up. It'll make it tricky. Mary suggesting the end of the month, the last Tuesday of the month, which will be tricky some months, but I'll send some proposed dates and we'll see how that goes. And then Gordon, why don't you give us an update? And then the last thing on my mind is sort of just content for the next couple of meetings, because it sounds like we're good to go on the applications. They will not be coming back for us to do. We'll all be now assuming our jobs as full council members as we talk about evaluation, and that'll happen at a big meeting. So go ahead, Gordon, and then we can just finish up with potential agenda items for next time.
So to remind you of what's been done in December. We moved to grant $1.5 million for up to 10 detox beds in both Franklin County and Androscoggin County. We then later, maybe April or May, repurposed the Franklin County money to instead offer them $400,000 in a grant for planning, and we repurposed that $1.1 million over to Tessa's house, which still doesn't have a contract for that, but they're moving furniture in those rooms and it's moving along. We're not getting a lot of pressure because their renovations was delayed by nearly 3 months because of some contractor issues. But now that's done, and now it's mostly the furnishing, and they hired an executive director successfully, and so I think they'll be ready to open at least by the end of the year. So in Androscoggin County, again, because we were skeptical as to whether anyone was willing to would necessarily respond to an RFP for detox beds, and because we have our new daily data on detox beds that you've heard us talk about before, they're still not full. And particularly with 18 beds at St. Mary's, it wouldn't seem to be prudent to start on a path to put up freestanding detox beds in Androscoggin County that would not, based upon our previous experience, would not see a patient in a bed for maybe 2 years. And I would frankly be my opinion that we would want instead to make sure that these 18 beds at St. Mary's are welcoming and available. So I met with a large coalition. Bruce is a part of that. In full disclosure, Bruce is a part of this coalition. That it might be called the Lewis and Auburn. I don't know. Can you come up with the name of the coalition, Bruce? It's anyway. It's the Lewis and Auburn collaborative. It's a large collaboration, and it does seem to have all the organizations around the table, including the 2 hospitals. So I had a good hour or so with them. It's co-chaired at least it's really led by Healthy Androscoggin, an organization that Liz would know. And I just talked to him about the same, I gave him the template that we have available from Franklin County that Leanna Lavoie did. And I just proposed that we might want to do the same thing that we've done in Franklin, that we know a lot more now about detox beds than we did in December, that we have this money available, and maybe they could have some meetings, collaborative community meetings, and inform us as to whether there's anything what their needs are there beyond detox. And so that's where they are. They are getting that group together again. They probably meet on a regular basis. I would say that the possibilities that the meeting that I had with them was very good, and they discussed everything from a recovery that's really not a recovery community center right now in the LA area. There is one kind of reopening. There's a drop-in place. The City of Auburn is going to do a community center, but there's not what we have at the barn or at PRCC in Lewiston, Auburn. So there is some interest in that, particularly on the Auburn side of the river. But I don't want to really presume what their needs are. So they know the money's available. They are going to engage in some planning. In other words, there's no pressure on us to put out that an RFP on the detox beds, because likely that's not going to be the needs. The other thing I did, I was probably presumptuous in doing so, but I encouraged them to include Oxford County people in their planning, because particularly the South Paris, Norway area they really are oriented towards Lewiston, Auburn. as opposed to say Rumford, which is a bit more oriented towards Farmington, and way down to Shakopee Valley, which is really more oriented towards Freiburg and even Portsmouth, Kittering. So that's where it sits. The ball's kind of in their court, in my opinion. And I think in this case, it's more important that the funds be spent wisely on compelling needs than for us to say, well, we think there needs to be more detox beds in Androscoggin County. So I'm sorry that took a little longer than I thought. Joe, I see Liz has her hand up, and
No, that's
and Bruce-
great.
Bruce may
Thanks.
want to comment if he's listening.
That's great, Gordon. Liz, go ahead.
Thanks. So I guess I just have a question about like process here, because I understand, like, I don't want to put in detox where detox isn't needed. And I also appreciate the like ability of these these geographies to do the work of assessing what they need and telling the council. I guess I'm a little bit like, how did we get to using the detox money now for these assessments, but not opening it up to other places that actually have lots of needs too? I'm not suggesting like it's not Cumberland County, like we pretty well know what's going on and what the needs are, but I'm thinking about like Penobscot, who's having a HIV outbreak, like what are their needs? Or like way down east, like are there other places? I guess I'm not sure how we got here. And like that it's like 400,000, to do it. I guess I appreciate the effort and the work you're doing, but you know what I mean? Like there are other places that would love to have assessment money, but that wasn't like put on the table for them
No,
as like
well,
an
I can tell
option.
you, yeah, well, I listen, it's a great question. Let me respond to it. We got there through the route that I just described, that in December, we passed motions 10 months ago, 9 months ago, that directed those funds. It was partially, there was a lot of pressure on us then, Liz, to get some money out the door. And
Well, I
so
understand how we got there, like why we're not spending the money. I guess I don't
Right.
know how we got to, like, when did we all decide we were repurposing the funds from detox to
we
these
did in April.
assessments?
We did that at a meeting in April with respect to Franklin and Tessa's house. That we did about 3 meetings ago. We've not had a motion or a discussion at a full council meeting on Androscoggin. I might have engaged the council in that last week if we didn't have so much to do, but I also preferred to start the discussion here. What you're saying is there's nothing stopping any member of the council from bringing this up at a council meeting and saying, I think that, we should have a discussion about repurposing some of the money that hasn't been spent that was committed way back in December. I do think that there's political sensitivities when we were very sensitive about how we handled Franklin County, and I'm very sensitive in how we handle Androscoggin. I mean, because even though we have every right until we sign contracts, we can absolutely do it. We could take that money away and give it to Washington County. But we want to treat everybody, Liz, fairly. You do, I do, the whole council does. And I would argue that this is money that absolutely could be utilized in Androscoggin County, and that we have money available if these other counties need planning money.
I agree. Then I think
Right.
we should offer that up and have a discussion about how we offer that up, as opposed to
No problem.
I guess I'm just like, you making this decision to have them do that. I mean, in some ways, I know you're not saying you're speaking for the council, but then you're putting us in a position to say, wait a minute, I want you to have the money, Androscoggin County. I would love for them to have the money. And I know that organization, and I know they would do great work. I'm not suggesting that. But it's more like, there are it should be, I guess I would say we should talk about repurposing it towards opening up for people to do assessments, to bring back to the council on where are their biggest needs that aren't going to get met by what we end up giving in this grant application. So that's my 2 cents.
Feel free to bring it to the council. I'm moving this stuff along. I'm not committing the council. I'm trying to help people in Androscoggin County utilize the resources that we've already committed to them. It would be unconscionable to, again, to just move on the plan to do detox beds. So yes, I suppose you could say I've taken it on myself as Pat. I would say this, Liz, in my role as director of opioid response, that is more consistent with the role that I'm playing with these councils. I'm not speaking for the council. I'm saying, hey, this is where we are with detox beds. This is what the council did in Franklin County. You might want to think about this.
Okay, Courtney, then Pat.
So I've wanted to raise this a couple of times, but I feel like this is now the moment. Gordon, with all due respect, I don't think that most people understand the difference between your roles. There has been multiple occasions where I've been approached by individuals and organizations that A, call this council Gordon's council, and B, talk about this money as if it's like you're the decision maker. And I don't know that I don't believe you're doing that on purpose, but I think that the role and the power that you bring to conversations often confuses people about the conversations that you're having. So I don't know what to do about that, but I feel like it needed to be said because it's happened to me on multiple occasions. I've had to like reflect it back to people and explain. And so that being said, I think I'm not comfortable with repurposing this for assessments right now because there is millions of dollars pending in LOIs and now in grant applications. I would be like more comfortable talking about it as going back into the pot as long as that money is spent in Lewiston or Androscoggin County, because that's what we talked about it for, is Androscoggin County. I struggle with this idea of doing more assessments when we have very clear needs in front of us that don't need to be like assessed anymore, just need to be like funded and implemented. And so I think that we should put it back into the pot of money that's available for the applications and tie it to Androscoggin County.
I completely disagree, but again, that's your opinion.
Pat.
So I see both sides. But I will tell you, as someone who went on behalf of the council and reported to the legislature that we were spending money in Androscoggin County to open a detox, and then we're saying maybe that's not the best use of our money, then I think that we owe the communities in Androscoggin County a voice to at least say, thank you very much, but we don't really need a detox. What we really need is this. And again, I know that that doesn't give the other counties a thing, but we specifically made a promise, a verbal promise, that we were going to open this facility, or at least open it up for RFPs. And so I think that we owe it, just like we did to Franklin County, that we put in money aside. They said, no, we'd rather spend it this way, and we allowed it to happen. I think the larger conversation is, do we open up funding for assessments? But before I do that for other counties, I'd like to have a conversation with the Cutler resources, because part of that is I think they're doing some work with cities and towns and communities in regards to what they're already doing with their opiate settlement dollars, and are they doing assessments? Again, I totally get that we should be looking at how to put this out statewide and give other opportunities, but I also feel that we owe Androscoggin an explanation if we're not going to do a detox like we said we were, and give them the opportunity to say something in regards to what their community really needs.
Bruce, did you have your hand up and your hand, now your hand's down? I'm just,
Yeah, sorry. I don't know. I'm going back and forth, but precedent was set with the folks in Franklin County and working closely with the Lewiston Auburn Area Recovery Collaborative. They've Healthy Androscoggin has done a needs assessment. They've been working on this for a number of years, and they had grant money to do that. There's already guidance that's been put forward. The community itself is making these decisions, and Mark is bringing all of the players together so that the community can make the decision about where this funding would go if they do not want to detox, or think that the money could be spent better elsewhere, which is exactly what's going on in Franklin County. So I think precedent has been set. And if we start going back on our word and start throwing things back into like a larger pot, I think we lose credibility.
thank you, Bruce. Liz?
I'm fine with spending money directly in Androscoggin County. I just don't know, like, I don't remember how we got here on like that it had to be an assessment. And I guess I'm just like, I'm not sure how we went. I understand why we shouldn't spend money on detox when they're saying we don't need more detox. And I also think if there's a group of people that can say what they think that should be spent on, then I'd be like better with that. And we also are going to get applications that are from Lewiston Auburn, rather than saying you have to go do an assessment. I'm sure folks there have we've assessed like nobody's business, and we have Catherine Cutler going to be doing that work. Like, people know what we need. I would rather them just say what we need, and then like, let's bring that to the council for funding.
I'm fine with
Pat?
I just have one quick thing. I think at this point, I would recommend that we have a conversation with the Lewiston group, and just hear what say, whether that's with program and grants or whether we carve out some money sometime at the council meeting. But I think at this point we have allocated the money. If that's not what they're saying their needs are, that we at that point hear them out, is my recommendation, either with this committee or that. The other thing is, I need to say, I'm grateful that Gordon Smith is on this committee, and I'm grateful that he's able to know the breadth of what goes on in the state. I certainly am not on one end of the state to the other the way he is, and his knowledge base in regards to what he sees is very valuable for this committee. And I just need to say that I've never seen Gordon cross the line. Again, other people may have, I have not. And when I hear Gordon, he always says he can't speak for the council, at least in my presence. And so I just want to be able to make sure that his work is valued with this committee. And I thank you, Gordon, for that. But I recommend at this point that we speak with the individuals at Lewiston and see what they have to say in regards to the money that we have already allocated in December for the detox.
So I like that idea, Pat. Mary, can you coordinate that? Or I don't know if it was you or Gordon who did the Franklin. It's the same thing as Franklin when we had Healthy Franklin or whatever.
Mary and I both met with Franklin, as I recall. I was in person. Mary was remote. Bruce is involved with this group. I mean, the way it is now, they really are planning to see what they need and then communicate with the council. So I think it's not, they may not choose the route that Franklin did, where they wanted like 18 months contract to do a needs assessment. I've seen the needs assessment. It was done by Healthy Androscoggin. It's pretty good. So I kind of like what Liz said most recently, that, I'm not saying that their needs assessment might be done in a single meeting, Liz. I mean, I'm not presuming how much time they need to tell us what collectively they would like to do with the money. And there'll be a lot of pressure on them to come to a unanimous conclusion, so that we don't have to have competing organizations and competing, and put out RFPs, because that will take us roughly a year at the rate we're going.
So who can coordinate with Lark? I guess is the just to keep this moving. I think
If there's concern about my role, then I would ask Mary to do
no, I don't
that.
have any concerns at all. I think it's just whoever has the easiest access so that we can
I
get
mean,
on the calendar for
I'm-
next time.
Well,
Sorry,
Bruce
Joe,
is-
I'm more than pleased to
Okay.
communicate with these folks and
Hmm.
Healthy Androscoggin and the city of Auburn, in the persons of Rowan McFadden and
Yep.
Jennifer Edwards are the folks, and I'll certainly reach out to them
Perfect.
directly, and then they can coordinate with Mary. I'll include Mary in the email.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, any other questions about this topic?
Well, I do know that I believe that now there is an open house scheduled in Sangerville at
Great.
the Recovery Center. And I believe it's on maybe Saturday, October 5th, I've heard. And I think the whole council will probably be invited. So that's a piece of good news. They're working hard up there to get the property ready.
That's great. So in
I'm
terms,
excited because I'm still living up here.
yeah. So if we can see, and now this evening setting out some possible dates for the next 3 meetings, and then that'll help you, Bruce, with sort of nailing it down. And then I think what I've been, and Gordon, feel free to help me out here with the sort of, I just think that now the council, we've through the application, the LOI and the application, now it is back to community needs conversations. So I think that I think is really important. And I think there's obviously lots of, ideas around that. So I'll work on an agenda with Mary and we'll try to like structure, but if we can get Lark, that would be great.
I don't want to speak for those folks, but I guarantee you they'll be there. Just tell them when.
Okay, perfect. Any other business as it gets on the hour? Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I'll send some dates to
Thank
folks
you.
this evening.
Good meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.